Welcome back, seekers of stories. If you've journeyed with us through Act 1 of Dusty Scroll, you know this is no ordinary tale. And if you're new here, subscribe now to Dawn Blessing Studio so you don't miss the chapters to come. Tonight, the saga continues with Act 2, Collision of Worlds and Unlikely Bonds, where human ambition meets ancient secrets of the sea, where storms are born from forgotten songs, and where a fragile bond may decide the fate of two worlds. Like this video, share it with fellow lovers of dark fantasy, and let's open the scroll once more. While the Titanis sailed, a shining example of human power and ambition, Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice now sounding like a gentle ocean song. Deep beneath the moving surface of the very same vast ocean, life pulsed with an ancient rhythm, completely unaware of the human show above. Far below the waves, hidden among bright coral canyons and swaying kelp forests, lay a secret civilization, a world of beautiful and very old wonders. This was the home of the merfolk, graceful and powerful beings whose lives were deeply connected to the sea itself. On this particular night, he leaned forward, his eyes bright with the images he was creating. The merfolk weren't just living, they were celebrating. It was the night of the Sunken Bloom, a very important spiritual event that happened only once in a human generation. It marked the rare blooming of a glowing ocean flower, a magnificent bloom that pulsed with an inner light, meaning new beginnings, good fortune, and the ocean's endless generosity. For the merfolk, it was a time of deep respect and great joy, a night to honor their ancestors and to give thanks for the endless gifts of their watery home. Throughout their coral cities, Mr. Abernathy explained, his hands making wide movements in the air, the merfolk gathered. Their skin shimmered with 1,000 colors, from the deepest blue to the palest green, reflecting the light of the sunken bloom. Their long, powerful tails, covered in scales and shining, moved easily through the water with the grace of ancient dancers. They wore garlands of glowing seaweed and necklaces of pearls from the deepest parts of the ocean. The young merlings darted and played among glowing sea anemones, their laughter sounding like silver streams. The older merfolk, their faces marked with centuries of wisdom, watched with calm satisfaction. And then the singing began. Mr. Abernathy's voice softened, almost becoming a hum. Their voices, usually a gentle murmur like the tide against the shore, grew into a chorus of amazing beauty and immense power. This was not just any song, it was an ancient, ritualistic chant, passed down through countless generations. It was a song of creation, of blessing, of deep connection to the ocean's very soul. It was a celebration, yes, but it was also a channel, a focused showing of their combined energy, a powerful, wild expression of their natural magic. Each note echoed with the force of the deep. Each harmony mixed with the currents, carrying their joy and respect outwards, beyond their hidden sanctuary, into the vast, uncaring ocean. They sang of the ocean's depths, of the creatures that lived within, of the sun's distant warmth on the surface, and of the sacred bond between their people and the water that sustained them. This was their hymn, their prayer, their statement of existence, pure and potent. Without them knowing, he continued, his tone becoming serious, this song, born of purity and celebration, had an unexpected result. The raw, wild energy of their ancient melody, a singing curse in its uncontrolled power, began to come together. It resonated with the primal forces of the deep, waking up sleeping energies, making the natural movements of the currents and the whims of the wind stronger. It was not a bad act, not an intentional calling of destruction. It was simply the sheer, unfiltered size of their magic, released into a world that, in its current state, could not handle its full force. It was like an innocent child's wish, whispered into a hurricane. The intention might be pure, but the result uncontrollable. Slowly, at first almost invisibly, a powerful storm began to form on the surface. What started as gentle waves quickly became a furious tempest. The sky, once full of stars above the Titanis, became a bruised, inky black, cut by streaks of electric lightning. The sea, once calm and inviting, exploded into a storm of huge waves, rising like liquid mountains. Rain poured down in sheets, visibility dropped sharply, and the wind howled like 1,000 screaming spirits. The very air vibrated with the raw power of the unleashed elements, a chaotic symphony controlled by an unwitting, ancient song. On the Titanis, Mr. Abernathy's voice grew urgent, matching the rising panic he described. The festive atmosphere instantly shattered. The ship, which moments before had seemed like an unbreakable giant, now became a toy tossed by an enraged god. Glasses shattered, furniture slid across polished floors, and the screams of frightened passengers mixed with the shriek of the wind. Captain Maxwell, an experienced sailor, fought desperately at the steering wheel, his face grim, his forehead covered in sweat, as the ship shook and groaned under the endless attack. The advanced navigation systems flickered, then died, overwhelmed by the storm's electromagnetic interference. The titanium hull, once a symbol of being unbreakable, now groaned under the immense strain. Its very structure was fighting against the forces it was designed to resist. The storm, fueled by the merfolk song and the ocean's ancient fury, pulled the massive ship off course. It drove it relentlessly towards the very island Mr. Abernathy had described, the island of jagged rocks and the hidden Mermaid's cave. The roaring waves lifted the Titanis as if it were a mere feather, carrying it towards its grim fate. Then, with a sound that tore through the very fabric of the night, a deafening shriek of twisted metal that echoed across the desolate ocean, the magnificent titanium ship crashed against the unforgiving, razor-sharp rocks that guarded the island. A shudder ripped through the entire vessel, a bone-jarring impact that sent people flying, lights going out, and the very dreams of thousands shattering into pieces of glass and splintered wood. The Titanis, once a symbol of human triumph, was now a mortally wounded beast, its grandeur reduced to a twisted, sinking wreck amidst the chaotic waves. Panic, raw and complete, seized the survivors. The ship groaned, tearing itself apart under the relentless beating of the waves. Water poured into broken sections, alarms blared, and the air filled with the cries of the injured and the terrified. Lifeboats were launched, some successfully, others flipping over in the monstrous waves. But even those who made it to the island's rocky shore found no relief. The storm had not only destroyed their ship, but had cut off all connections to the outside world. The advanced communication systems were gone, washed away, destroyed in the crash. There was no signal for communication. No distress calls could be sent. No hope of rescue could be called. They were stranded, completely isolated, their world reduced to a treacherous, mist-shrouded island and the wreckage of their former lives. They were truly stuck on the island, helpless and alone, a handful of confused humans cast upon a shore that held secrets far older and more powerful than any they could understand. The days that followed the crash were a living nightmare for the survivors.
Mr. Abernathy recounted, his voice now filled with a sense of stark reality. The storm eventually calmed down, leaving behind a scarred landscape and an atmosphere of deep despair. The island, once mysterious from a distance, showed itself to be beautiful but unforgiving. Thick, tangled jungle filled the inside. The air was heavy with humidity, and the jagged coastline offered little in the way of safe harbor or resources. The thousands of passengers had dwindled to a few hundred, huddled together on a dangerous stretch of beach, surrounded by the broken remains of the Titanis. Food and fresh water quickly became the most urgent concerns. Desperation ate at their determination. The police, led by Inspector Thorne, tried to create order, organizing search parties for supplies, but their efforts were hindered by the unfamiliar land and the huge scale of the disaster. The military personnel, like Captain Rostova and Sergeant Carter, relied on their training, trying to build makeshift shelters and ration what little supplies could be saved from the wreckage. But even their skills were strained by the strange environment. Hope, a fragile flame, flickered dangerously, threatening to go out with each passing useless day. Diseases began to spread, spirits dropped, and the initial shock gave way to a growing, unsettling fear. They were truly alone, stranded on a forgotten piece of land, seemingly abandoned by the world. It was during this time of grim struggle, Mr. Abernathy narrated, his eyes momentarily meeting Alex's, that a young man named Liam found himself increasingly separated from the main group. Liam was a tourist, a quiet, thoughtful young man who had booked passage on the Titanis, seeking a break from his boring city life. He wasn't a natural leader, nor was he particularly strong or skilled in survival. But he had a natural curiosity, a gentle nature, and an unusual sensitivity to the world around him. He found the constant arguments and falling morale of the main camp increasingly hard to bear. Driven by a vague feeling, and perhaps a desperate need for solitude, he began to venture further along the coastline, away from the grim reality of the survivors' camp, drawn by the island's haunting beauty and the whisper of the waves.
One afternoon, after days of searching without success for freshwater sources away from the crowded, disease-ridden camp, Liam stumbled upon a hidden cove. It was a place of breathtaking, secluded beauty, untouched by the wreckage or the footprints of the other survivors. The water here was unbelievably clear, showing a vibrant underwater garden of corals and fish. A small freshwater spring trickled from a moss-covered rock face. Its water was cool and sweet. He drank deeply, his thirst quenched, feeling a momentary peace he hadn't experienced since the crash. As he rested by the spring, his gaze idly drifted to the clear waters of the cove. And then he saw her. Mr. Abernathy's voice dropped, filled with a sense of wonder. Not an illusion, not a trick of the light, but a living, breathing creature of unimaginable grace. It was a mermaid, her form swaying gently with the unseen currents. Her upper body was slender, her skin the color of sun-warmed sand, and her long, flowing hair, the shade of deep-sea kelp, floated around her like an emerald cloud. But it was her tail that truly captivated him, a magnificent, shimmering display of scales that glimmered through a range of ocean blues and greens, catching the sunlight that pierced the water and turning into scattered jewels. Her eyes, large and bright, were the color of the deepest ocean, intelligent and ancient, filled with a quiet curiosity that mirrored his own. Her face was calm, almost otherworldly, yet held a hint of a powerful, wild spirit. Her name, he would later learn, was Marina. She was young for a mermaid, barely past her teenaged years, but possessed a quiet wisdom beyond her age. Liam, despite his initial shock, felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of wonder and a strange connection. He remained perfectly still, afraid to startle her, afraid to break the spell. And she, in turn, seemed to study him with an equal measure of caution and fascination, her head tilted slightly, her tail moving in silent grace. For a long moment, they simply watched each other, two beings from wildly different worlds, connected by a single shared breath. Slowly, hesitantly, Liam began to offer small, non-threatening gestures. He spoke softly, though he knew she wouldn't understand his words. His voice was gentle and reassuring. He extended an open hand, palm up, a sign of peace. Marina, after a long, evaluating look, copied his action, her slender, webbed fingers reaching out, hesitating, and then gently brushing against his own. Her skin was cool, smooth, and surprisingly firm. It was a silent acknowledgement, the first fragile thread of connection. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Abernathy continued, painting a picture of growing closeness. Liam returned to the cove every day, drawn by an invisible force. He brought her small gifts, a polished stone, a vibrant jungle flower, and in return, Marina would show him wonders of her world, a school of fish that danced in intricate patterns, a glowing sea anemone, a piece of ancient, beautifully shaped coral. They developed their own way of communicating, a language of gestures, shared looks, and the universal understanding that comes with true connection. Yet it was Marina, with her natural merfolk abilities, who truly bridged the gap. With a gentle touch and a deep mental effort, she made it possible for their thoughts to mix, allowing them both to understand each other's languages not through sound, but through shared ideas and emotions. Liam learned the subtle movements of her tail, the slight changes in her facial expression, the soft, melodious clicks and whistles she made, which he slowly began to recognize as expressions of joy, curiosity, or warning. Marina, in turn, seemed to understand his moods, responding to his quiet despair with a gentle touch, or to his wonder with a playful splash. Their friendship grew in the secluded cove, a secret garden protected from the harsh realities of the outside world. Liam, desperate for companionship that wasn't colored by fear or hopelessness, found comfort in Marina's silent presence. He shared his fears about his stranded friends, his longing for home, his disbelief at what had happened. Marina, though unable to speak his language, listened with deep, empathetic eyes, and in her own way offered comfort. She taught him about the hidden pools, the safe paths along the rocky shore, and the edible plants that grew in the jungle. He began to see the island not just as a place of survival, but as a living entity, vibrant and alive, filled with secrets.
This was a bond built on trust and mutual curiosity, Mr. Abernathy emphasized, his voice now gentle, filled with quiet admiration. It went beyond species, challenging the very idea of other. Liam and Marina, one human and one mermaid, found common ground in their shared existence on that mysterious island, building a bridge between two vastly different worlds. They were proof that empathy could grow even in the most difficult environments, that understanding could overcome old beliefs, and that a truly pure connection could form between beings who, by all accounts, should have been enemies. But such peace, such a fragile, beautiful secret, was not meant to last.
Mr. Abernathy's voice hardened, carrying a note of unavoidable tragedy. The longer the human survivors were stranded on the island, the more desperate and resource-scarce their situation became. Their daily struggle for food, water, and shelter grew more intense. Hope dwindled, and with it, their patience and their humanity. Fear began to distort their perceptions, making them suspicious of anything unknown, anything outside their desperate reach. The pristine beauty of the island became a mocking background to their suffering, leading to resentment and a fierce protective instinct. Liam, despite his deepening bond with Marina, still felt a sense of responsibility towards his fellow survivors. He tried to subtly guide their search parties towards areas where Marina had shown him fresh water and edible plants without revealing his secret. But the jungle was vast, and the survivors, exhausted and disheartened, often ignored his advice or simply couldn't find the elusive resources. Their frustration grew, turning into a simmering paranoia. One fateful morning, Mr. Abernathy narrated, his voice gaining a dramatic edge. Liam and Marina were sharing their usual quiet moments in the secluded cove. The sun dappled through the leaves, painting shifting patterns on the water, and Marina was teaching Liam a new series of rhythmic clicks that seemed to communicate the calm of the tide. Suddenly, a rustle in the dense leaves above the cove startled them both. Liam's head snapped up, his heart pounding in his chest. Before he could react, several figures burst through the undergrowth, their faces grim, their eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and a desperate, wild fury. They were some of the police officers from the Titanis, including Inspector Thorne and a few other hardened survivors. They had been on a particularly long, fruitless patrol. Their nerves were frayed, their hope almost gone. Their eyes, scanning the cove for anything useful, landed first on Liam, and then, with a horrifying jolt of recognition and disbelief, on Marina. The sight of a half-human, half-fish creature, shimmering and beautiful yet completely alien, immediately triggered their deepest fears and prejudices. In their exhausted and terrified state, they didn't see wonder. They saw a monster, a threat, perhaps even the cause of their predicament. Their faces twisted with a primal terror that quickly turned into aggression. Years of training and the desperation of survival overrode any sense of curiosity or reason. There was no moment of hesitation, no attempt at understanding. It was a swift, brutal reaction. One of the men, a strong officer named Miller, let out a harsh cry of "Monster!" He raised a sharpened piece of salvaged rebar, a makeshift spear, and lunged towards Marina. Others followed suit, brandishing their own crude weapons, broken planks, jagged stones. Their intention was terrifyingly clear: to catch the mermaid and try to kill her. Their movements were fueled by a desperate, instinctive need to eliminate what they saw as a terrifying, unnatural threat in their already chaotic world. They believed they were fighting for their very survival against a creature from nightmares. Marina, startled and terrified, pulled back, her beautiful eyes wide with confusion and fear. She tried to dart away, but the cove, usually her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. The men were quick. Their desperation gave them a brutal efficiency. She thrashed, her powerful tail splashing, but they were determined, closing in. Their hands grabbed at her delicate skin, their crude weapons ready. Liam's mind screamed. The horror of the moment ignited a fire within him, burning away his quiet nature and his usual hesitation. This was Marina, his friend, his confidant, the being who had brought him comfort and understanding in this nightmare. He couldn't let them harm her. Without a second thought, driven by a surge of desperate courage, he threw himself forward, positioning himself directly between Marina and the attacking humans. "Stop! No!" he yelled, his voice raw with anguish. "She's not a monster. She's my friend."
His sudden intervention momentarily stunned the attackers, giving Marina a precious few seconds to wrench free from their grasp and dive deeper into the cove. Liam, despite his lack of training, fought with a surprising fierceness. He pushed, he shoved, he yelled, putting his own body on the line to shield Marina's escape. He grabbed Miller's arm, twisting the rebar away, his face a mask of determined fury. He was fighting his own kind, the very people he had shared a ship with, the ones he should have been allied with. But in that moment, Liam saw only the monster in their eyes, not in Marina's. His act was pure, selfless heroism, a desperate gamble to save her from their violent prejudice. He absorbed blows, his skin scraped and bruised, but he did not give up, providing the precious moments Marina needed to disappear into the deeper waters of the cove, leaving behind only ripples. But Liam's heroic act, while saving Marina in that instant, had an unforeseen and terrible consequence. Deep beneath the surface, drawn by the frantic struggle, the fear, and the clear smell of human aggression, other merfolk had gathered. They were from Marina's group, drawn by her distress, by the disturbance in their sacred cove. Their glowing eyes watched, hidden just beyond the immediate sight of the humans. They saw the violent attack on one of their own, witnessed Liam's desperate defense, and observed the raw, prejudiced brutality of the humans. For centuries, the merfolk had lived in secret, avoiding contact with the surface world, keeping their myths alive to protect themselves. But now, the veil was torn apart. The merfolk, seeing their sister attacked, seeing the aggression, suddenly understood a terrible truth. Humans were on their island, not just one lost soul, but many. And these humans were violent, dangerous, threatening their ancient way of life, disrespecting their hidden sanctuary. The shock of discovery quickly changed into a cold, ancient fury. The peaceful celebration of the Sunken Bloom turned into a burning rage, a shared instinct for self-preservation that went beyond individual emotion. They had been attacked, their home violated, their hidden existence was now at risk. This discovery was the ultimate betrayal of their long-held secrecy.
Without warning, the sea itself seemed to rise in a fit of revenge. The water in the cove churned, rising and falling with an unnatural speed. From the deeper shadows, more merfolk emerged, their faces grim, their eyes no longer curious, but filled with a chilling, determined resolve to hunt. They were armed not with metal weapons, but with the raw power of the ocean. Sharp, coral-like blades formed from hardened seawater, currents that could bind and crush, and voices that, unlike the celebratory song, now hummed with a terrifying, powerful sound designed to confuse and cause pain. They swarmed the cove, their movements swift and silent, appearing as if from nowhere. The human survivors, already exhausted and confused, found themselves suddenly facing an enemy they couldn't understand. The merfolk were too fast, too fluid, too deeply connected to the very environment they were fighting in. Their initial fear gave way to complete terror as they realized the situation had reversed. This was not a rescue mission. This was an extermination. A chilling, guttural cry, a sound that spoke of ancient grievances and untamed power, rose from the merfolk. And in that terrifying moment, the war between the two species broke out. It was a brutal, swift, and merciless conflict, Mr. Abernathy stated, his voice now flat, without emotion, conveying the sheer horror of the event. The merfolk,
with their deep knowledge of the island's hidden waterways and their formidable powers, had the clear advantage. The humans, trapped and outnumbered, fought with a desperate, useless courage. Inspector Thorne and Captain Rostova attempted to organize a defense. Their training kicked in, but against an enemy that moved like water and used the ocean itself as a weapon, their efforts were tragically useless. The sounds of battle were horrifying, human screams mixing with the sharp alien calls of the merfolk, the clash of makeshift weapons against fluid forms, the sickening thuds as bodies fell.
The merfolk were relentless. They hunted the humans through the dense jungle, ambushed them from hidden pools, and dragged them into the depths of the ocean. They showed no mercy, for they saw no innocence in these invaders, only threat and destruction. The beautiful, vibrant island became a hunting ground. Its calm coves and lush forests were stained with violence. One by one, the human survivors, from the tough police officers to the vacationing military personnel, from the desperate criminals to the innocent tourists, were hunted down. Their screams echoed, then faded into the vast, uncaring silence of the jungle. The human presence, once so loud and destructive, was systematically, terrifyingly erased. "In the end," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice dropping to a somber whisper, "the merfolk succeeded in their terrible revenge. The war was decisively won. All the humans were killed, every last one. The island, once again, belonged solely to the ancient beings of the sea. Their sacred home was cleansed of the trespassers. All," he emphasized, his gaze sweeping over the children, then resting on Alex. "All, except for the young man, Liam." He paused, allowing the importance of the statement to sink in. His lover, the mermaid Marina, defied her own people. She defied the ancient rule of revenge. In a desperate, selfless act of deep love and loyalty, she saved him. She could not allow the war to claim the one human who had shown her kindness, who had defended her against his own kind. She risked everything, her own standing among her people, perhaps even her own life, to protect him. How she did it remains a whispered secret of the deep, Mr. Abernathy said, a hint of awe returning to his voice. Perhaps through hidden tunnels known only to the merfolk, perhaps by using currents so powerful they could sweep him away from vengeful eyes. She guided him, shielded him, pouring all her strength and magic into his escape. She helped him escape, not back to the desolate beach where the bodies of his comrades lay, but away from the island entirely, out into the vast, forgiving ocean, toward the distant horizon. She returned him, a lone survivor, to the human world, a world he now saw through the lens of a terrible war and an impossible love. He carried with him not just the scars of survival, but the lasting memory of Marina, the shimmering scales, the deep, knowing eyes, and the sound of a mermaid's song that had both cursed and saved him. Mr. Abernathy leaned back in his armchair, a deep sigh escaping his lips. The candle flickered, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. The air in the cozy corner of the dusty scroll was thick with the weight of the story. The children were completely silent and still. Alex felt a lump in his throat. His imagination was reeling from the vivid, brutal images. The mermaids were not just beautiful beings, they were powerful and vengeful. The humans were not just victims, they were aggressors, driven by fear. The complexity of the tale, its moral uncertainties, resonated deeply within him. He looked at Mr. Abernathy, his eyes wide, waiting.
The story was so real, so immediate. It felt less like a myth and more like a whispered truth.
Thus ends Act 2 of Dusty Scroll, a tale of storms, shipwrecks, forbidden bonds, and a war no human could win. But the scroll is not yet finished. The ocean keeps its secrets, and the next act is already stirring in the deep. If this story held you, don't let it fade. Like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to Dawn Blessing Studio. The tale continues in Act 3. And trust me, you will not want to miss what lies ahead.